punches you in the face. So I hope you all have a chance to be introduced sometime, like LJ introduced me, because you hardly recognize yourself as you hear it. But thanks for that introduction. And I gotta say, it's really nice to be in front of actual living, breathing human beings rather than pixelated heads on a screen. I know we're kind of back in the swing of things, but it only now feels like we are coming out of the pandemic. So it is great to be in front of folks. And it's really nice to be in Charlotte. It is my first time here. And it is really a delightful city with delightful people. I was a little, some of the people at the table I was sitting at saw me flinch a little bit, LJ, when you said I was going to not only talk about U.S.-China relations and the era of Xi Jinping, but also about the negotiation of the release of American hostages in Afghanistan in the next 15 minutes. So it is a little bit of an ambitious agenda, even before you add on Afghanistan, but let me try to do this as quickly as possible. And I'll start off by saying, when I was at the embassy in Beijing, I would go to events like this. About 5 minutes beforehand, they would shove a script in front of me. I would put it in front of me and read it off, you know, word for word, and someone would be sitting in the back making sure that I read word for word. It's not quite the same when you're not when you don't have 1,000 people working for you. So I just jotted some notes down. I will try to be as spontaneous as possible, but if I refer to these notes every once in a while, if I go way off track, forgive me. I've got to say, first of all, this group in the back from the North World Academy of Languages, did I get that right? What the narwhals, that was how I was trying to remember you. What a really remarkable bunch of students. I started studying Chinese when I was in my mid-20s. You all know, except for that table there, you're going to find out in 10 years, just how much your brain freezes up by the time you are in your early 20s. So, you know, they are a decade ahead of where I was studying Chinese, and in a decade, I'm really looking forward to having, coming back to Charlotte to hear one of them addressing this group with all they've done. So I've got 3 goals in the next 11 minutes that I've now left myself. So how did we get here, us, the United States and China? Who is Xi Jinping and what are his goals? And then what is the U.S. doing and what has the U.S. done to try to respond to those? That's a really tall order. A little bit of history. So I started my career, some of the people at this table know, and I've now spoiled my joke. 1985, I guess it was, a senior at the University of, going into my senior year at the University of Illinois, a history major, and realized that I have 0 marketable skills. There was nothing that Dave Rank could offer anyone who would agree to give me money in exchange for that. So I kind of looked around and I thought, all right, I don't want to go back to the south side of Chicago. If you're from the south side of Chicago, you don't need to know why, you don't need to ask why, but just trust me on that one. And so I thought, okay, I want to go overseas, I want to do something, what are the options? At that point you had Japan was kind of running the table economically, because Japan is #1, they were taking over the world. There was really no end in sight to the Japanese economic miracle. Really tough language, too late for me to try to study that. There were lots of people who were already jumping in on that game. So, okay, what about politics? You know, sort of the political side of things. And there was the Cold War, U.S.-Russia relationship. Again, a really difficult language. People have been studying for years and years. I had 0 chance of emerging as something competitive if I tried to pursue an expertise as a Russia guy. And so I said, well, you know, you're a billion Chinese. Not a lot of people studying Chinese. I'll do that. And kind of stumbled into a scholarship in Taiwan, and the rest, I guess, is history. But the lesson I take from that is, one, sometimes better to be lucky than smart. I got very lucky that, or if you get one thing right, cling to it. I guess is the other lesson. I have kept that in my marriage too. I've been married to my wife for 33 years, and I intend to cling to that one too. But also, you know, just because things appear one way today doesn't mean that's the way they will always be. That, you know, in 1985, it looked like Japan and Russia were going to be the big players for the next 100 years. And of course, within just a few years of that, the Japan economic bubble had popped. It entered its the first of its lost decade, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. But I sort of guessed the right horse. Took the Foreign Service test while I was in Taiwan, and ended up in my first Foreign Service assignment in 1990. And I've got lots of stories, I can talk about those. But the one I want to highlight is, the junior most guy at a very small consulate. One of my jobs was to squire around visiting delegations of American officials. So, get Congress people come. I would be the person who would trot them around town, show them the different things, introduce them to American business people, and then take them to see government officials. At that point, the Shanghai municipality had a big building, used to be a bank on the banks of the river that flows through downtown Shanghai. And you would go in and they would get the briefing, and if you have been in a Chinese briefing, you would hear about GDP numbers and how many square meters that are covered by various parts of industry. And then they would trot out, take you into a room where there was a big map, a 3D map of the city of Shanghai. And you could look, and there's the river flowing through, and there's the building we're in. And then across the river are these row after row of gleaming skyscrapers to the sort of as far as the eye can see. And of course, we were there. We were just outside, and we looked across the river, and there were not any gleaming skyscrapers, right? It was a howling wilderness across the river in China. But the Chinese officials would say, but that's the plan. That's the Pudonglu area, and that's what we're going to do with that place. And of course, you're a skeptical American, you roll your eyes, you say, yeah, sure. And now let's get back to the topic at hand. If you go back today and you stand on that riverbank and look across the river, there is that row after row of gleaming skyscrapers. And I mentioned that story not to say that every sort of cockamamie sounding plan that comes out of a Chinese official's lips is going to come true, but to keep in mind that sometimes they do, and the Chinese system has a way of putting a lot of energy behind things that they've decided to do. Third bit of history, I'll jump ahead to 2008. I have the good fortune to be at our embassy. It was actually my second time at the embassy from 2006 until 2009. Good fortune to be there during the Beijing Olympics. And there's really, those of you who are old enough to remember watching the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics know that it was a spectacle that I think we have not seen in the Olympics and probably will never see again. It was really remarkable. And if you were Chinese, I think a lot of Chinese looked at that as a sign that we've arrived, that China has sort of emerged as an important global player, given on the strength largely of economic growth of the past 20 or 30 years. That was 2008. August 8th, 2008. About 10 days later, Lehman Brothers collapsed, something like that. So that was kind of the other shoe, that not only did Chinese feel like their country had emerged, but the Western economic model that they had seen as such a guiding basis for their policy didn't look so good after the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the global financial crisis. And they took that to heart, and that I think has been that theme has run through Chinese policymaking ever since then. But behind that sort of foreground of really remarkable success, economic success, you could tell that there were people in the party who were the Communist Party who were really worried about China's direction. They looked at things like corruption within the party, that just really, it had become, as we used to joke, the world's largest Elks Club. You didn't join because of an ideological belief in what it stood for. You joined because what it could bring you personally, what you could use it to do to deliver personal benefits to yourself and your family. There were problems, really massive problems of growing inequality in society. There were big problems of cynicism among ordinary Chinese, and a sense that ideology really had no significant role in their life. Almost sort of the Communist Party to a lot of ordinary Chinese was not quite a joke, but really an afterthought. And that's the background to the rise of Xi Jinping. There is a narrative, I think, that Xi Jinping sort of, in a way, there was a palace coup and he took over the party, that the party didn't know what it was getting. My take is pretty much the opposite, that Xi Jinping, from the party perspective, is not the disease, he's the cure. That the party leaders understood that Xi Jinping wanted to have a very firm hand on the direction of the party, and they saw that as a good thing because there was gridlock in Beijing. There were growing interest groups within the Chinese system that were out for themselves and not out for the interests of the PRC and of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and they were willing to take that bargain. That they would live with the strong hand of Xi Jinping in exchange for what everyone in the party saw as their main goal, which was to make China a strong, respected country globally. And I'll say as an aside that the image of Xi Jinping, even to today, I haven't seen polling post COVID, and so that's a big asterisk. But in the United States. Probably the best predictor of how an incumbent president is going to do is the right direction, wrong track. You just ask people, is the country going in the right direction or is it on the wrong track? The latest numbers I saw for our president is about 20% say it's going in the right direction, 80% on the wrong track. The latest numbers I've seen for Xi Jinping are about 90% right direction, 10% wrong track. So almost exactly the opposite. He is not imposed on the ordinary people of China. Yeah, people grumble because people grumble, but overall, Chinese people think their country is going in the right direction. So then, if you look at some of the behavior of the Chinese system, you ask, this does not look like a country, a system that feels confident. Whether it's hundreds of millions of surveillance cameras in Chinese cities throughout the country, whether it's a detention of 1 million or more ethnic Uyghurs in the West, Muslim ethnic Uyghurs in the west of China, the prosecution of 1 million or more officials and party members over the last several years. I mean, real signs of a party and a system that is unsure of where it stands. So why is Xi Jinping nervous? I think first of all, to be the head of the autocrat at the head of a one-party state, that is the fate you are born into. That autocrats, elections, and we can talk later about the party congress coming up just in a few days. But the politics don't stop when the party congress ends. That a leader of the Chinese system is always worried about what happens tomorrow. But also, there are just lots and lots of problems in the Chinese system. One is, it used to be pretty easy easy is a relative term, to govern China. If you deliver economic performance, people were generally satisfied, looked at the Chinese government as an effective, and they were satisfied with it. But now Chinese citizens also want cleaner government, they want cleaner air, they want less inequality, while that not coming out of their pocket, but out of someone else's pocket. So just a lot more complicated issues that the system has to deal with than it did, say, 10 or 20 years ago. Also, then when Xi Jinping gets up, he looks outside his window and says, I've got economic issues. The economy, which was growing 10 years ago at double-digit rates, and at 5 years ago in the high single digits, this year might hit 2%, 3%, maybe. You've got COVID not running rampant in the country. In fact, the exact opposite problem, that they have been so successful with a zero COVID approach that they don't know how to get out of it. You have real estate, which accounts for somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the economy, under real stress, overvalued, a very large bubble, and not a real clear path out. You've got huge debt at almost every level of society, at the national level, at corporate level, at private level, in individuals, and in local governments. And then longer term, you've got concerns like demographics. By the end of this century, there could be 400 or 500 million fewer Chinese than there are today because the direction of Chinese demographics, in part a product of the one-child policy, and in part because the economic pressures that I think all of us know of having one kid's tough enough, two is really tough, and three, I can tell you, is even rougher. And then things like climate change and China's, I would say, unique vulnerability to that, and the external economic, political environment that was pretty favorable, its relations with the United States, with the European Union, with the rest of the developed world, now look pretty unfavorable. But fundamentally, up to now, I think Xi Jinping's assessment remains the same, which is China is still a rising power, and the United States is the yardstick against which China measures itself, is a declining power. And that's the fundamental assessment, what that's driving a lot of decision-making in the Chinese system and by Xi Jinping. So I would say, and we can talk about these plans when we come to question time, but Xi Jinping has big plans. Big plans to ensure what he calls common prosperity, which is poorly defined, but what appears to be, well, it's real tough to define, but the way it has played out has been a lot of the most successful businesses in China have taken it in the neck without bringing a lot of benefit to the folks at the bottom end, who are going to be very difficult to assist in the ways that China has used before in terms of economic levers. Made in China 2025, another big plan, which is essentially a plan to make China the dominant player in the key industries of the 21st century. Things like semiconductors, new energy vehicles, batteries, artificial intelligence, the kinds of things, if you're an American policymaker, you wake up and worry about as well. And on that, let me just talk very briefly about the U.S. response. I would say, like me, the United States government and the folks who look at China understand that China has big plans. They don't all come to fruition, but you have to pay attention to them. Obama, I would say, President Obama continued the bipartisan approach to China of an effort to engage China, to pull it into a web of international commitments and relationships that would make it a sort of bind it to an international order that the United States had created in the aftermath of the Second World War. By the end of the Obama administration, and I would probably date it to 2015, when Xi Jinping came to the White House, assured President Obama that China would not militarize the newly built islands in the South China Sea, and then very quickly afterwards did. I would date as kind of the shift in the Obama administration approach to that. And for the remainder of the Obama's presidency, there was an increasing effort, although when you're in the waning year or two of your presidency, I haven't been president, full disclosure, but the energy to make major shifts that we've seen in the last couple of years is sort of fading. The Trump administration, you all remember, and I was there for the start of it, came in with a bang. I would say it was very definitely skeptical of engagement, but importantly, not just with China, but also with a lot of our traditional partners. The Biden administration, I think, has sort of tried to pull back to a, I would say, three-level approach to China. The first level being here in the United States, making investments in things that will make us more competitive as a nation, not just with China, but more generally with the global economic challenges we face. The second is to shore up and build on partnerships with traditional partners and allies. And the third, and very intentionally the last of those, is to, based on the success in those two areas, to address the concerns we have with the PRC. Lastly, for those of you, and I know the students over here are looking for some reading to do, it's all in English. I have 3 speeches I read. Wait, only 2 of them are in English. You're in luck. 2 of them are in English. The first is a speech Tony Blinken gave in May of this year laying out the Biden administration approach to China, and it's just exactly what I described. America first, take care of the issues we can here first, partners second, and then turn to China. The second is Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, the speech he gave last week as he rolled out a package of new regulations on primarily the semiconductor industry and restrictions on the kinds of things that American companies and those that use product of American companies, what they can export to China. And the third, I'm going out on a limb because I haven't read it yet, no one has read it yet, is the speech that Xi Jinping will give on the 16th at the start of the 20th Party Congress, the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of China, where he's going to lay out what his plans are. Oh, I've spoiled it for you because, yes, he is going to be reappointed as the head of the Communist Party. And he's going to lay out what those plans are going to be. So, LJ, with that, I'm going to stop. I see you're on your phone. You're live tweeting this.
Yep. We will have our board member from Parker Poe, Mr. Steve Hunting, join you on the podium.
Great.
Thank you, Ambassador Rankin. I'm going to give an opportunity to some of our attendees to ask some questions of you. I warn you that the student questions will be the most direct. But I'd like to start with one of the students like to ask a question of Ambassador Rank. If not, you can think about it a moment. How about someone else? Sir, well, if you don't mind to stand up and just say your name, maybe, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Jay Johnston from Bank of America. I'm a banker for the defense industry, so I think a lot about issues related to global and national security. My question is in the context of the invasion of Ukraine. Xi Jinping and Putin met several weeks ago, and a statement that came out of that meeting was the Chinese expressed some concern about what was going on. I'm curious how you interpreted that statement. What did it mean? Is there meaning to it, and what does it say, if anything, about the Chinese view of world order and global security?
Sure. The Chinese have been signaling very heavily to the Russians that they're getting a little impatient. First of all, thank you for that question. It allows me to use my very, very bad China-Russia joke, which is, or at least explain my theory of China-Russia relations, which is I call the Casablanca theory of diplomacy. Those of you who have watched the movie Casablanca know that Humphrey Bogart is the suave, debonair bar owner, and one of the regular customers in his bar is Peter Lorre, the sniveling police informant. And in one scene, the sniveling Peter Lorre comes up to Rick, the owner of the bar, and says, "Rick, I suppose you despise me, don't you?" And Humphrey Bogart says to Peter Lorre, "Well, if I thought anything of you, I probably would." And that's the Chinese view of Russia at this point, that they don't see Russia as a yardstick, as a legitimate strategic counterpart. They are a useful partner in their competition with the United States, but that is the extent of what they are for. And I think Xi Jinping felt a little misled in February when he met with Vladimir Putin, and I presume Putin told him that they were going to invade. It would have been bad form if he didn't tell them they were going to invade Ukraine less than 3 weeks later. But I'm also pretty confident he assured them, we've got this, we will get this done very quickly. Here we are 7 months in, and I haven't looked today, but as of yesterday, it did not look like the Russians were going to win in short order. And China's getting really impatient for a number of reasons. One, it's weakening this kind of useful tool they have in the Russians. But also, it's been awkward to watch. I mean, the really core of Chinese foreign policy philosophy has been the importance of sovereignty, national sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And that one's a really hard one to square. And so it wasn't just Xi meeting with Putin, but if you saw a few weeks before that, the Chinese foreign minister, for the first time at that level, was in New York for the UN General Assembly, met with the Ukrainian foreign minister. It's pretty clear, Chinese are pretty good at sending that kind of signal that we're getting a little impatient, Russia, with this. You've got to find a way out of it. I don't know Russia. I'm not sure what that way out, because none doesn't look good from a Russian perspective.